kids, welcome back to my channel. My name's Lizzie. We're reading our very first Valentine's book of the season. And I read these books when I was a kid. This is a new book in the Nancy Drew collection. I wanted to keep it going. They look very different than the books. If I could find it, I think I have them. These are the Nancy Drew books I grew up with. And these are your new ones. So I wanted to keep it going for you. I'm going to read the first 3 chapters, and then next week or maybe in a couple days, whenever I do the next one, I'm going to be doing 3 chapters at a time. This one is called Nancy Drew and the Clue Crew for Valentine's Day Secret. Ooh, looks exciting. Are you ready? If you need to get a snack, I will try to write the timestamps for each chapter so that you can see where we're at if you need to pause it and come back. So we're starting the first chapter at 1:07. Alright, chapter 1. Utterly sneaky. I don't care about Valentine's Day, George Fane said. Pink hot chocolate sounds gross. Bess Marvin sighed as she soothed her pale pink sweater over her hot pink skirt. I can't believe you don't like pink, George, she said. And I can't believe you two are cousins, 8-year-old Nancy Drew laughed. Bess and George didn't think alike or even look alike. Bess had blonde hair and blue eyes. George had dark, curly hair and brown eyes. But they did have one important thing in common. They were both Nancy's best friends. That day, Nancy, Bess, and George were celebrating Valentine's Day at their favorite store in River Heights, Farmer Fran's Barnyard Buddies. At Barnyard Buddies, kids could pick out a stuffed horse, pig, cow, or sheep and dress it any way they wished. They could even watch a stage show or drink hot chocolate in the store's Cocoa Cafe. We have our animals, Nancy said, hugging her fluffy, stuffed sheep. Now let's pick out their clothes. What are we waiting for? George said. She waved her stuffed cow in the air. Let's move it. The girls hurried to the costume corral. Dozens of tiny costumes hung on racks. Beth chose a fairy princess dress for her stuffed horse. It was pink, of course. George picked out a baseball uniform for her cow. George is a girl. Nancy didn't know what to choose until her eyes landed on the perfect outfit. Check out this neat detective costume, Nancy declared. She held up a tiny trench coat on a plastic hanger. There's a magnifying glass in the bucket. George pulled out the magnifying glass and peered through it. It works, Nancy, she said. Now your sheep can be a detective just like us. Nancy nodded. Not only were the 3 friends detectives, but they had their very own detective club called the Clue Crew. And their own headquarters were in Nancy's room. I'm going to give my stuffed animal to Hannah for Valentine's Day, Nancy decided. She waved to Hannah Gluen, who was sipping tea in the Cocoa Cafe. Hannah smiled as she waved back. She had been the Drews' housekeeper since Nancy was only 3 years old. And I'll give my horse to George, Bess said excitedly, as long as she gives me her cow in exchange. I guess, George said. She wrinkled her nose at the fairy costume in Bess's hand. But I don't like fairies. And I don't really like baseball, Bess said with a shrug. So we're even then. Nancy brushed her reddish blonde hair away from her eyes as she looked around for an empty work table. Suddenly, a voice boomed across the loudspeaker. Hey kids, it's showtime! Nancy, Bess, and George hurried to join a crowd in front of the stage. Everyone cheered as 4 teenagers dressed as a pig, sheep, horse, and cow ran on stage. The teens worked at the Barnyard Buddies. When they were helping kids build stuffed animals, they were putting on a show. We're the Barnyard Buddies and we're here to stay, saying we're going to kick it up on Valentine's Day. The teenagers did a little dance as they called out the names of Michelle, Corey, Tanya, and Jose. So grab your barnyard buds, they sang, and dress them in some funky duds. Each teen fell on his or her knee as they slid onto the front of the stage, mooing, baaing, neighing, or oinking. Nancy, Bess, and George clapped and cheered. But everyone went wild when Farmer Fran ran on stage. Yee-haw! Farmer Fran shouted. The tall woman was dressed in a checkered shirt and overalls. Who's ready to have fun till the cows come home? Nancy didn't know what that meant, but she joined everyone else in shouting, Yee-haw! Speaking of cows, Fran said, it seems that the stuffed cow went faster than a weasel in a hen house. So there are no more cows. I repeat, there are no more cows. Got mine, George said, giving her cow a shake. But guess what? Fran called out. Because it's Valentine's Day, we're going to have a special contest. Nancy, Bess, and George exchanged excited looks. They loved contests. The kids who find heart-shaped tickets in their animals' pockets will win some mighty fine prizes, Fran explained. So start building those barnyard buddies. Just then, Nancy heard George cry out. She spun round to see George glancing around frantically. What happened, George? Nancy asked. Someone snuck up behind me and snatched my cow, George cried, holding up her empty hand. Look, Bess said. Nancy looked to see where Bess was pointing. Racing away with a stuffed cow under her arm was a girl with long curly hair. She wore a cow print sweater, black pants, and cow print sneakers. It's Colette Crawford, Nancy said. Colette was in a different third-grade class from Nancy, George, and Bess at school. Everyone knew she was a cow fanatic. Some of the mean kids at school called her Cowlette. That's not nice. Finally got a picture. Look at it, they're running away with the cow. I bet you the Clue Crew's going to be on the case. Colette, George called, wait up. Colette froze in her tracks. She clutched the cow tightly as she turned around. What's up? She asked. Did you just take my cow? George asked. Yours wasn't the only cow in the store, George, Colette said. There were plenty before they ran out. Yeah, George said, but mine had a blue baseball cap on its head, and so does the one you're holding. Oh, Colette murmured. Why don't you pick another animal? Nancy asked. She pointed to Tanya, who was building a tower of stuffed pigs. Pigs are cute, and they're supposed to be good luck, too. Colette shook her head and said, everyone knows how much I love cows, so one of the glass cows should have gone to me. Not fair, George said. Give it back. Make me, Georgina, Colette said. Okay, so her real name is Gina, but they call her George for short. Uh-oh, Nancy groaned under her breath. George hated when people called her by her full name. I said, give it to me, George demanded as she reached for the cow. Colette turned and began to run. Get it back, George, Bess urged. I want you to make me a cow for Valentine's Day. George shoved the baseball uniform she was holding into Bess's hands. Then she shot off after Colette. When she finally caught up, she lunged and snatched the cow back. Way to go, George, Bess cheered. But as George turned, she slipped on some loose stuffing on the floor. Nancy gasped as her friend began sliding straight towards Tanya's tower of stuffed pigs. Look out, Nancy shouted. Too late. George crashed in the tower of pigs. All the pigs crashed down on top of her. Oh no. There's all the pigs. Alright, we're starting chapter 2 at 9:08. Cheese and crackers, George groaned. She dusted herself off as she crawled out from under the plush pile. I spent half a day building that piggy pyramid, Tanya yelled. Don't you know that kids aren't allowed to run in the store? George looked at Tanya and her pig suit. She was pointing to the rules poster on the wall. The first rule was no food at the work tables. The second was no stuffed animals in the Coca Cafe. The third was no running in the store. Oops. Sorry, George said. It was an accident. Nancy and Bess hurried over. We can help you rebuild the pile, Tanya, Nancy offered. Sure, Bess said, flexing her arm muscles. I can build and fix anything. Tanya seemed to think about it as she ran her tongue over her teeth. They were covered with shiny silver braces. "The piggy pyramid is my job," Tanya finally said. "Go find a table and work on your animals." Tanya picked up the pigs as the girls walked away. "It really was an accident," George whispered. Why did Tanya have to be so mean?" "You were running in the store," Bess said with a shrug, "and you saw the rules. No running allowed." George stopped walking to stare at Bess. "Wait a minute," she said. "You told me to run after Colette." "I told you to get the cow back," Bess said. "I never told you to run." Nancy watched as Bess and George argued back and forth. She couldn't let them have a fight. The three of them were BFF, best friends forever. "You guys," Nancy said, "we came here to celebrate Valentine's Day, not to fight." George stared down at her sneakers. Bess twirled her hair between her fingers. "Look," Nancy said, pointing across the store, "there's an empty work table. Let's take it before someone else does." "Okay," Bess sighed, "but then it's pink hot chocolate all around." "Barf," George added, but then she began to laugh. Soon, Nancy, Bess, and George were laughing together. They were still best friends forever. The girls sat down at the table. As they worked on their animals, Nancy noticed their friends Trina Van Doof and Mary Rubin and Nadine Nargo at another table. Marcy was showing off all the Valentines she got in class that day. 8-year-old Henderson Murphy sat at another table. Henderson's father drove the Mr. Drippy ice cream truck every summer, but there was nothing sweet about Henderson. "Look, George," Nancy said, "Henderson is making a baseball cow, too." "Copycat," George said. "You mean copy cow," Bess giggled. She pointed to the baseball jersey on George's cow. "There's a button missing. I can fix that later if you want." "I know," George said with a smile. "You can fix anything." Beth smiled as she braided part of her horse's tail. After putting the finishing touches on their animals, it was time for hot chocolate. "Remember," Beth said, "no stuffed animals allowed in the Cocoa Cafe. That's rule number 2. George lagged behind while Nancy and Bess walked towards the Cocoa Cafe. "I'm just checking my cow's pockets for a prize ticket," Georgia called. She shook her head. "No luck." The Cocoa Cafe was circled by a white picket fence. Nancy, Bess, and George sat down at Hannah's table. As they sipped hot chocolate, Hannah picked up her camera. "Say cheesecake," Hannah said. The girls wrapped their arms around one another's shoulders and squeezed hard. "Best friends forever," the girls shouted as Hannah snapped the picture. It was an instant picture. There they are. Cute, right? Nancy, Bess, and George watched as the image slowly appeared. When it did, they saw themselves smiling and hot chocolate mustaches. "Thanks, Hannah," Nancy said. She took the picture and slipped it in her pocket. "You're welcome," Hannah said. "Now go get your animals. It's 4:30 and time to go home." The girls hurried back to their work table. Bess handed George the fairy princess horse she made. George thanked Bess and handed her the baseball player cow. "He's awesome," Beth said, hugging the cow. Suddenly, a pink heart-shaped paper fell out of the jersey pocket. "Maybe it's the prize ticket," Nancy said excitedly. Beth smiled as she unfolded the paper. "It's a valentine with a poem inside," she said. "It says, 'Roses are red, violets are blue.'" Bess's eyes flew up. "What else does it say, Bess?" Nancy asked. Bess read the rest of the note through gritted teeth. "Feet are stinky and so are you." Nancy's mouth dropped open. "It says that?" George asked. "As if you didn't know, George," Bess snapped. "What?" George cried. "You think I would?" Bess nodded as she tossed the card on the table. "You're so mad at me because I blamed you for running," she said. "That's why you stayed behind, so you could write the valentine and stick it in the cow's pocket." "I can't even write poems," George insisted. "Not even nice ones," Nancy agreed. She turned to George and added, "Sorry." reading. My pages are a little wet. It came in the mail today. Got my package all wet with the snowstorm. Bess placed the cow on the table. I don't care if we're cousins, she said. We're not best friends anymore. Nancy couldn't believe her ears. The three of them were more than best friends. They were a team. But what about the Clue Crew? Nancy asked. Bess grabbed back her fairy horse. Well, now you can be the Clue Crew times 2, she said. Bess huffed over to Marcy and her mom. Nancy had a pretty good idea. She was asking Miss Rubin for a ride home. I believe you, George, Nancy insisted, but if you didn't write that nasty Valentine, who did? I don't have a clue, George said glumly. Clue, Nancy repeated. Something tells me this is a job for the Clue Crew. Yeah, George sighed. The Clue Crew times 2. That's sad. So we're starting chapter 3 at 16 minutes. Last one for the day. Chapter 3, Bubble Trouble. Hannah loved the detective sheep Nancy made for her. She sat it next to her in the front seat as she drove Nancy and George to the Drew house. I wonder if Farmer Fran will serve green hot chocolate on St. Patrick's Day, Hannah chuckled. Why didn't I drink pink hot chocolate? George wailed. Maybe then Bess wouldn't have been so mad at me. George, Nancy said, you didn't do anything wrong, but it does really stink that you guys are in a fight. The minute Hannah unlocked the front door, Nancy and Drew ran up the stairs to their detective headquarters. While George opened up a new case file on the computer, Nancy propped the baseball cow on her bed. Then she studied the nasty Valentine. It was a red heart with a smaller pink heart flap over the front. Under the flap, the nasty message was written in blue ink. This isn't even your handwriting, George, Nancy said. You may have the messiest room, but you always get A's in penmanship. Thanks, George said, I think. You also checked your cow's pocket for a prize ticket before you went to the Cocoa Cafe, Nancy added, and you said they were both empty. They were, George agreed. That means that nasty Valentine was dropped off while we were at the Cocoa Cafe. Nancy tapped her chin thoughtfully as she imagined the timeline. We got to the Cocoa Cafe at around 4 o'clock, Nancy said. I remember Hannah saying it was 4:30 by the time we finished our cocoa. So the crime was committed sometime between 4 and 4:30, George asked. Yes, Nancy said. Write that down, George. Nancy was about to pick up the stuffed cow when she jumped back. Stuck to the bottom of the cow's hoof was an icky wad of bubble gum. Since when did the crew blew bubble gum? Since when do you chew... Oh. Why can't I read, kids? Since when do you chew blue bubble gum? Nancy asked. I don't, George said. She looked to see where Nancy was pointing. Even if I did, I wouldn't stick it on anything. Nancy narrowed her eyes at the gum. I'll bet the creep who left you the creepy Valentine did it, she said. But who could it be? There's the gum stuck to it and a little cow. Somebody's really mean out there. It's not my cow, George said. Whoever did it was probably mad at me. The word mad made Nancy think. Oh, wait. It was my cow, George said. Whoever did it was probably mad at me. The word mad made Nancy think. Colette Crawford, Nancy explained. She was mad that you didn't give her your cow. She wasn't the only one who was mad at me, George remembered. Remember how Tanya acted when I knocked over her pig pile? Accidentally knocked over, Nancy corrected. George typed Colette and Tanya's names in the meantime. Nancy pulled the picture that Hannah took of them out of her pocket. In it, all three of them were still BFFs. Nancy leaned over George's shoulder. Using a pink plastic tack, she pinned the picture on her bulletin board. George looked up at the picture and sighed. It's weird solving a mystery without Bess, she said. I know, Nancy said. She forced a smile. But the faster we solve it, the faster we'll all be friends again. and Nancy wanted that more than anything in the whole world. The next morning, Nancy and George walked to school together. Bess usually walked with them, but not today. She also always hung her jacket between Nancy's and George's in the classroom, closest. But not today. Classroom closet. Oh my goodness. Nancy, look, George hissed. Bess is wearing the purple banded bracelet I made for her birthday. Nancy turned as she hung up her puffy parka. She could see Bess's bracelet dangling from her wrist as she shoved her earmuffs into her jacket pocket. Maybe she's not mad at me anymore, George whispered. What do you think, Nancy? There's only one way to find out, Nancy replied. Nancy strolled over to Bess and gave a little wave. Hi, Bess, she said. Want to play kickball with us at recess today? Who's us? Bess asked. Nancy said. Me, Kendra, Trina, George. I'm not playing if George is playing, Bess cut in. I can't tell George not to play, Nancy said. She's my best friend. Yours too. Not anymore, Bess said. I think I'll play kickball with Marcy at recess. Marcy is the most popular girl in the class now. I know, Nancy marveled. She watched as Bess hurried over to Marcy's desk. She didn't know what was worse, having a fight or being smack in the middle of one. I heard everything, George said, groaning. She hates me. She never said that, Nancy insisted. Nancy and George were about to head for their desks when their teacher, Miss Ramirez, called out, Henderson! Nancy and George snapped around. Miss Ramirez was standing at her desk holding a bunch of valentines in her hands. Yeah? Henderson asked from his desk. Some of your classmates came to me this morning, Miss Ramirez said. Did you hand out these valentines yesterday? Henderson said, gulping. What valentines? There they are flaming again. Oh, girls. Miss Ramirez read one of the cards out loud. Roses are red, pumpkins are rust, your face looks like a pizza crust. A few students snickered, but Nancy's jaw dropped. That valentine sounded just like one George got. George, Nancy whispered, are you thinking what I'm thinking? That's the end of the first video. I hope you're liking it so far. We'll continue on in the next video. So stay tuned, kids. See you next time.